Welcome, folks. My name is Josh Gordon. I am the senior editor at theleadpastor.com. And it is super cool to sit down with a new friend, fellow Canadian, Ryan Johnson. Ryan, you're the pastor at Church Untitled. And I'm really excited to have a chat with you specifically around fundraising and a capital campaign that you guys recently did and pull some encouragement, some actionable insights, and some general thoughts for readers, listeners, whoever. So yeah, well, introduce yourself, and I got piles of questions I'm excited to jump into. Yeah, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, Josh, so good to meet you and hang out with you for a little bit. I'm pastor with my wife and an incredible team at a church called Church Untitled, which is downtown Vancouver. And we've been here for 8 years now in the same location, yet different location. And we just moved to like the basement of a location that we've had for a long time. Yeah, it's months ago. So we're right smack downtown Vancouver on the center of it all. So yeah, it's been fun, amazing.
Dude, that's sweet. So 8 years. So that would encompass years through COVID. So
Yep.
I'm a pastor as well at it's not really a church plant. We've just hit 6 years. So it feels like a sapling church.
Mhm.
And so for COVID, we were moving around a lot just because the different places we were renting were opening and closing and whatnot. Was that something you guys experienced too?
Well, so we had a space. So we're blessed incredibly from the beginning of our church to have a space that we could meet in consistently 7 days a week if
Oh
we
man,
wanted to.
awesome.
It was an old nightclub, and it's a long story about how we got there, but ultimately the relationship with the owner of the building, right? So think about a big building that spans blocks downtown that had a nightclub in it. We just got used to the space, and at the beginning it was just hey, you can use it on Sundays, and then grew up a little bit as a church and wanted some security, so we signed a lease for it. So through COVID, we did have a
Yeah.
space to come to and record and meet and all that stuff. So it was
That's
again,
awesome, man.
yeah.
So, I'm also super curious to hear a little bit more about the name, like Church Untitled. It kind of like flies in the face. Maybe a lot of the general branding
Yeah.
kind of approach that a lot of churches and more recent church plants seem to take. Like, unpack a little bit about that and sort of thinking that you guys had around it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think like on the practical side, we were aware early days of some of the pitfalls, I think, when it came to branding as we were praying and trying to decide what is God going to call this and what are we going to call this thing? How are we going to be known? And there's all ends of the spectrum we can look at when it comes to what we should call a church and all the brainstorming and all that. But ultimately, it was quite simple at the beginning and kind of grew into it, which was awesome. But at the beginning, it was really just this sense of ultimately wanting to be known by God's name and not our own. And so the Untitled thing kind of launched out of some thoughts around just traditional marketing, where a lot of the movement in the last kind of 100 years, let's say, in marketing moved from being known by the quality of the product that you had to what it said about you as you engage that product. Think like Nike, for example, outsourcing production to offshore and other places, and the quality would drop a little bit, but the branding and what it said about you as you engaged it kind of increased, right? And you wore Nike shoes, like make me like Mike kind of thing. And so just the sensitivity to that creeping into the church a little bit, where oftentimes the brand of a church, think big mega churches, would say something about the person that would go to that church, or if you're attached to a big brand, what it said about you. And so we really wanted to be known by God's name, and let that be this thing that distinguished us, his very presence amongst us. And when he said they will know you by their fruit, I think that's what we wanted to be known by. And so that's the very practical component. And we're not against names. I think Church Untitled is a name. It is a brand in some sense. I joke that it's the anti-brand brand, but we really just want to be known by what he calls us. And so that's the practical side of it. The spiritual side is it's a posture of worship for us. So Untitled doesn't mean that we don't say the words pastor or I have names of jobs in our churches, but it's a posture of worship. You see it in Revelation where they cast their crowns at the feet of Jesus, and then in some sense become untitled before him, or David bringing the ark back to Jerusalem, dancing in his ephod. Like he took off everything that represented him as king before that king. And we know God gives us crowns. He does. But what we do in worship is we place them back of his
Yeah.
feet, or, Tower of Babel in Genesis 11, where they wanted to make it for themselves. And so we just recognize that at times this can creep to our ethos at
Mhm.
times of like wanting to stand
Yeah.
out or wanting to put a lot of effort into how we
Yeah.
look or how we function. When God really looks at the heart. So there's a lot
Mhm.
there, but ultimately he called it his
Yeah.
church, and we want to be known by
Yeah.
his name. So
So, kind of drilling down on that a little bit, when so the thing about like the values of your church in terms of like a lot of churches have like values or like a statement of values or here's how we want to operate. Like calling your church Church Untitled for the reasons that you did, in some ways that's a massive
mhm.
value statement. So if do you
Yes.
have values that are clearly stated out, laid out? And it's still like I'd love to hear what they are.
Yeah. Some of them are spoken, some of them are unspoken, or I should say some of them are on our website, some of them are just
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
mapping that we carry. But like, some that would be in other churches too, like presence over
Yeah.
program. Like it matters to us what he wants to
Mm,
do, and we want to follow him. And so the temptation to become, you know, uh, built on programs, and programs are amazing, but like those things are carrying the weight of what we're doing. We rise and fall based on the things that we do versus rising and falling based on what
yeah,
God's doing, his presence.
totally.
Things like that, family over
Mm,
function, right? Like who he says we are, and in his family matters a lot more than your position in family. Sons and daughters, that's our primary identity. So things like that. Culturally, will say things like we're not going to settle for anything less than the fullness of God's
yeah, yeah,
promise. So just high bar, like we want to go after everything that he has
yeah, yeah.
for us and not stop
Yeah,
short.
awesome.
Mhm.
So when you think about some of like big conversations that you have to have, like directional conversations. So you allude to your
Mhm.
leadership team um, earlier on. Can like just kind of give it a bit of a scope for people. How many people you generally would you consider like really committed disciples who are like in your church? And then what kind of like a leadership team structure do you have? I'm not looking for like crazy detail, but just like just to give a bit of a
Yeah.
context and scope.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're in an interesting phase in our church right now where I really don't know. It's probably a bad thing for me to say, but I really don't know how many people like would fit into each category and where
Yeah.
they're at. Particularly because we just moved
Mhm.
locations, and in our previous location, people were intimidated about coming because I mean we were seeing lineups before church, an hour before church started to get
Oh,
in,
wow.
and once they got in, right, if they're not there 45 minutes early, they're not getting a seat,
Wow.
and it's people sitting on the floor. And so for a long time, I think people wouldn't come,
Yeah.
even though they consider themselves part of our church. But like, hey, I slept in, I can't,
Yeah.
I'm not getting in
Yeah.
anyway, so I'm not going to
Yeah.
show up or watch online. And so when we moved to a bigger location, uh, the church doubled its capacity, more than double, tripled its
Yeah.
capacity on a Sunday to host. And so we're in that, and we've been here for a month and a half
Yeah.
now. So we're in that space of like, okay, where is everything
Mhm.
landing? And so we have this other movement in our church called House Church, and we desire 80% of our church to be in House Church, which is kind of a midweek, what other churches would call small
Gotcha.
group or whatever. But we want to have the fullness of the
Yeah.
church in those spaces, the gifts of the
Yeah,
Spirit,
yeah.
all these things happening in that. And so we desire 80% of our church to be in those spaces. And I think previously we were at 80%. We don't know where we're at
Yeah.
now. So I would say we got about 250, 300, to be very ignorant, to be
Yeah.
honest with you, the
Yeah.
numbers. 300 like solid people, and probably another 200, 300
Yeah.
figuring out whether or not they want this to be their
Gotcha.
spot.
Cool. So then with that context then, tackling like a significant decision like, okay, we want to start looking for a new building. Was there
Yeah.
like talk maybe a little bit about what the process was like in terms of like you and your wife versus like other leadership teams, like some of those early
Yeah.
conversations. Talk a little bit about that. Maybe kind of give like a bit of a high level
Yeah.
overview of the kind of
Yeah.
decisions and thoughts that you guys had and nailed down together first.
Yeah. No, it's a great question, man. I think it's probably been an unorthodox approach, but really, coming out of COVID, speaking of COVID, right before COVID happened, we were in this season or this phase of what I was just calling essentialism. Like, what is actually essential here?
Mm,
I joke around about the pageantry at
yeah, yeah,
times. in churches, right? Like like Christmas was coming up. I'm like, what if we don't do all the things we're supposed to
Yeah.
do, quote unquote, supposed to do? Well, people
Yeah.
leave, and those were real anxieties at that time. And we actually had two services at the morning and evening service, and evening service was kind of the most populated service. Like young people would come and check it out and see low bar of commitment, and like, but high value on presence. And we're seeing that people were struggling with applying it in the week and like being transformed in discipleship, all those things. So those things were kind of aching in our soul a little bit. And so 2 weeks before COVID happened, not knowing COVID was coming, we actually shut down our evening service.
Oh, wow.
For some of the values of discipleship and wanting to like double down on family and growth and all those things. And of course, we invited everybody to come to the morning service. Not we disbanded, but said, hey, we're really going to focus. And 2 weeks later, COVID happened. So there was this more isn't always better, less is more kind of idea. And so we come out of COVID, and we hit a growth phase in our church, and there's that moment where we don't have seats left, and we don't have a massive venue, but it's 200 people in our space that fits 150. And so we're overflowing all this stuff. And so there's the temptation, okay, well, how do you do a growth here? Are we putting another service, or are we going back to an evening service? And so there came a moment where like, okay, we're going to do 2 morning services. We have a high value for, as I said already, presence kind of base. So like, we'll let it go a little bit, extend it. So we'll have hour 45, 2-hour services. So it's not easy to turn that around and do it again. Even if there's a kind of prophetic impulse, like how do you replicate that? And so we tried that, and there was no grace on it. So to try to steward the growth, we did 2 services. It really wasn't working for us. So brought it back down to 1 service, and we kind of lived in that space with this pressure, like internal pressure. So at some points we had 140 seats comfortably. We're putting 300 people in the room, people hanging from chandeliers, just getting them in. And so for a long time, we resisted the kind of internal impetus to double up having another service, because it just wasn't what we felt the grace of God on in our midst, right? So there came a point where an evening service came in again, for various reasons. But ultimately, I'm saying all this to say that we became quite sensitive to what we felt God's grace was on through experimentation. It's not as if you get all that right away, but like, oh, it wasn't there, we got to pull back, right? So when it came to being comfortable with those who really want to be here will be here, which is a bit controversial in church, but that's really how we framed it. We were like, okay, well, we can't. There's a lot of missed opportunities too, right? Like if growth or like ability to host different things. Our kids ministry was down the block, up in an awful space, right? So there's a bit of a hurdle there, and so we wanted to build together, and so we're praying and discerning. And quite honestly, one day I was on a run near the beach by our house, overlooking the city, and I just felt my spirit come alive about this space that was right beneath the space that we're in. So we were street level, and then just in our building, there's a space beneath, about 10,000 square feet. But it was a college at the time. I think it was up for lease, but it was outfitted as a college. I had no clue what it would look like open, but my soul just came alive with this idea. And to that, I just said that was the Spirit of God speaking to me about this. And so there was an impetus there. There was an energy in my soul about this. And so from there, you start discerning with team, and there came a point where we did a little bit of a feasibility study on the space, asked them to come in, get the razors out, and where we could put walls and all these things. And I brought that to about 40 people. I remember gathering them at my house and said, hey, here's the space. Here's how much we think it's going to cost. Here's what we could do. Here's the opportunities. Kid space. We can gather, 350 people in it comfortably. It's downtown Vancouver. We have free parking in the building. Like, there was just a ton that it seemed as if this was God's grace on it. And so putting it before the team, just like finger on the pulse. What do you feel? What do you sense? And so determining that together amongst the body was really important for us. And it was a green light from everybody.
Yeah. Man, so many cool things in that story that I really love. And so one of the, I guess, the personal values that has kind of like started to really impact me, like in terms of pastoring, especially on the kind of like unsexy practical side, like finances. Like I don't feel like I'm a great, like I'm a personal, like relationally oriented person. So when it comes to like spreadsheets and numbers, like, okay, I'm out of my depth. If I'm in there
Yeah.
too long,
I'm
I
with
start getting
you.
a
I'm
migraine.
with you,
Yeah.
man.
And
Yeah.
but the problem, what I think what can happen, and I've heard this from other pastors too, is that you start to carry financial pressure. Um, and it's very easy, especially for smaller churches, to kind of carry it on your own. And so what I love about, and you kind of like alluded to this multiple times throughout the story, is that you alluded to like sharing with other people, like having conversations and talking about like, okay, it didn't sound like you were carrying the pressure of your church like on your own shoulders. And that like
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
okay, getting a smaller group together and saying, hey, this is some of what we're feeling, we're sensing, and getting other people's buy-in. Like, no, actually, buy-in is probably the wrong word. It's obviously the wrong word. Like, it's not buy-in, it's getting other people's sense, like trusting the Holy Spirit in them as well to help kind of
Yeah.
clarify and help you see things more clearly. And like, so that really
Totally.
stands
Yeah.
out to me. And I think that if there's a
Yeah.
takeaway, well, there's going to be a bunch of them, I'm sure, but like, this is definitely one of them where it's like, okay, don't
Yeah.
carry this on your own, like involving
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. For me, I mean, I think that's like just something intuitive in some sense. And I completely agree that like if you let things take their own place and the pressure to carry it alone, sometimes it just happens. But for us, visually, even in Joshua chapter 3, which has been a big kind of foundational passage for us. But you see in that passage where Joshua tells the people to stand back 2,000 cubits from the
Mhm.
ark, right? And any good, scholar of Sunday school, like would know that you don't go near the ark because it's
Yeah.
holy, right? But what I find interesting about that passage is to stand back about 2,000 cubits. Like it's not specific. It's not, if it's holy, it's going to be like, hey, here's some accuracy around how you deal with this. If you read another translation, it really alludes to the fact that your other translations from the NIV, I should say, that they alludes to the fact that they're standing back so that everybody can see.
Oh, interesting.
And you see that in God's heart for Israel, right? So the pillar of
Yeah.
fire over the ark, the cloud by day, and it says in the end of Exodus, so that everybody could
Yeah.
see, not just one or two
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
three. And so really leaning into that, and that's some of the prophetic impulse that we felt from the word of like positioning yourselves so that everybody can
Mm.
see. So that was a bit of like, okay, I can't be Moses, just being like, guys, trust me, God
Yeah.
told me
Yeah.
on a mountain. It was more so, okay, now Joshua's leadership, position yourselves to follow the ark wherever it goes, we
Yeah.
go. And so it couldn't be, trust me, thus saith the
Yeah.
Lord. It had to be, God, if this is real, you're going to tell it to all these
Yeah.
people who want to follow you.
So in that meeting, was there pushback, or did you feel like there was pushback, or?
I think there was some prudence in
Mm.
people, right? So different gifts at the table of like, well, budgets, what's it going to cost? But at the end of the day, there was a lot of trust in the room. I think there was a lot of trust for me. There's a lot of trust in me for them to give room for voice and
Yeah.
concern. So there was, I think there's, business people or developers or marketers or money people. There's practical questions that people want to move
Yeah.
through. But at the end of the day, I think we were far enough along the journey as a church to know that, okay, well, those things matter a lot, but at the end of the day, they're subject to what the
Yeah.
Spirit is. And there was I think, a strong
Yeah.
grace in that room of like, yeah, this makes
Yeah.
sense. We should do
Yeah. Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Mm. Mm.
Yeah. At least, I mean, they might have had some closet feelings I didn't hear about, but no, there really
Yeah.
wasn't a lot of pushback.
You know,
I think I had the most concern out of anybody, to be
interesting.
honest with you.
Interesting.
Yeah.
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 The offhand comment, the closet feelings. I
Yeah.
think that the uh I feel like there's something that's actually really important there. And you actually alluded to it, like having a lot of trust in the room. One of the things I think that's really helped me in my own personal ministry, and also in our church, is like the idea of like building a high trust culture, building a culture in your
Mhm.
leadership team where it's safe for people to disagree with the leaders. And it's valuable if you disagree with the leaders. And
Yeah.
but also
Yeah.
like the more personal trust you have in the person, it's almost like the more permission that you give them to be honest with you about what they're actually feeling and thinking, the stronger your
Yeah.
decisions are going to be. It's like we're in a multitude of counselors. There's
That's great.
wisdom, right? And so it's also like
That's great.
the I just went through an experience in the last week or so where that was kind of tested in a sense like I was trying to make something happen and then I got like
Mm,
no's back from people that like I trust them to make the decision. And it still kind of hurt my
right.
feelings. I'm a very feelings person.
Mhm.
And so my friend likes to say I have big feelings, so they're an easy target. And so it's like it kind of hurt my feelings, but at the same time, it's like I like working through that and being willing to um, step into the mess of a relationship for the sake of the kingdom and for the
Yeah.
sake of honesty, knowing that if I can hear your heart, I give you the space for you to actually share the kind of feelings,
Mhm.
and not just feelings, like the discernments that you have. Like creating that culture is such a big deal because then when it comes to really big decisions like this, where the stakes are pretty high, um,
Yeah.
you get
Yeah.
you have the clearest sense of the Holy Spirit's leading. Like, man, so yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's cool. I feel like that's such
Yep.
an important aspect of positioning
Yeah.
yourself to be able to hear
Yeah.
the Holy Spirit and to sense where He's leading and stepping through the doors that
Yeah.
He's opening.
Yeah. I think you're nailing it where that can't be turned on in a moment.
No,
You have to cultivate that ahead of
absolutely.
time because you're going to extract way more than you've deposited over
Yep.
the years. And so I think it has to be embedded in the
Yeah,
culture first.
absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so walk me through then the okay, you have the meeting with the 40 folks and then okay, we're going to you hit a point where like okay, we're going to pursue this. Um how much strategy did you put in place? Did you have a plan? Was there like okay, were you kind of like winging it step by step? Like what like how did you guys approach that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I got to take myself back to that time. But I would say like the few components, the practical ones like construction, like can we actually do this in this
Mhm.
space? Like it wasn't outfitted for us, right? So what is the city going to allow? What are our lease negotiations going to be like? If we're going to build it, who's going to build it? And like, how are they going to budget it and process it? So we went through a lot of those iterations. And the moment that we brought it to the church, it was, I think we called it a vision Sunday. We're kind of reluctant to have those, but
Yeah.
this was a big moment. We had the ins and outs. We had, who's going to build it? How much is it projected to cost? What are we gonna vent in for
Yeah.
operations, right? So we have all this growth, all of those numbers, timelines is what we're hoping. But there was no, let's say, plan for fundraising. We had
Yeah.
ideas in the sense of, oh, we'll try this, but at the end of the day, we're just like, hey guys, here's what we feel the Lord is sending us into. As the leadership of the
Yeah.
church, come follow.
Yeah.
Let's go. Let's do this together. If you see this
Yeah.
too, right? Don't do it based
Yeah.
on my word. Here's this thing that is out
Yeah.
here. And it's not necessarily a building, it's just the movement of the
Yeah.
spirit in our church. If you see it, come
Yeah.
follow with us. And if you want to follow with us, that means you gotta send your life after it. And if you want to send your life after it, then your money's gonna ratchet
Yeah.
it too.
Yeah.
So it was a bit like
Yeah.
top line, right? Like here's what we're doing, here's how much it's gonna
Yeah.
cost. Are you
Yeah.
in? Are you out?
Okay, so quick context question. So
Yeah.
what's the leadership structure of your church? Are they congregationally led, board led, pastor led? Like how does that
Yeah, a bit of a
okay.
hybrid. I think when it comes to like voting structures and stuff like that, it's
Okay.
board led. And so we have a pastoral team. Again, we're non-denominational, so we don't have a structure that was handed
Gotcha.
to us. So elder, shepherd led for sure. And we have overseers
Yeah.
externally that patching if there's
Yeah.
crisis. And so, I'm governed by an organization called CMA personally. And so I think we're very, very
Yeah. Yeah.
relational, probably more so than most
Yeah.
denominational churches in that, like, we're really just life on
Yeah.
life. And I know that sounds scary to a lot of people, but I think done the way that we see in the scriptures, I think can be healthy. And so That's, a bit of the
Cool.
organizational structure.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. I just think, I think that's an important point to hit specifically, because like different pastors listening to this may be facing different scenarios, right?
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes, totally.
Um, yeah.
But I will say to that, I mean, our board was instrumental in this, right? Like, not a decision financially is made without the advocacy of the board. And so they're very, very much board protected, right?
Ooh, I love that.
Staff
Board
directed.
protected. I love that. That's a great line. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting as you're talking, like, man, that sounds like our church. This is like, so we have a pastoral team, an elder team. So there's 4 of us. And then we have, we call them our board of deacons, but it's a board of directors essentially. And so it's elder directed, like board protected. I love that. So, which basically means I get to kind of outsource most of the financial decisions to the board and like the people who kind of get off on that stuff. So I feel like there's so much, like, I grew up in the church and my dad is a pastor, my grandfather is a pastor. And so in that context, I like watched the amount of pressure that could just like crush a person.
Yeah.
And that's like not necessarily throwing shade at my dad and my grandpa, but it's like church structure, I think, is so, so important. And so it sounds to me that the structure that you guys had and a lot of the foundations that made this fundraising and this step of faith possible were laid long before the actual, I'll use the word crisis, not like a bad crisis or an unexpected crisis, but like a key decision point. Like a lot of those things were in place in a healthy place. It sounds like, at least when you actually end up facing that spot. So,
I think in retrospect, that's true. I think so. Yeah. So the value through and through would have been like following God. And so now we follow God here. Now he's taking us there and it's going to take us there, but it's the same line. It's the same thing that is the foundation of all of it.
Yeah. Cool. So you have your Vision Sunday, and then what was the response like?
Yeah, it was cool. I was thinking about back at that a couple of days ago because we just kind of came into the building a month and a half ago now. Just thinking back to the moment where we, in some sense, pitched it to the church. But I talked about living stones, right? So we called it the Altars Project.
Altars, yeah.
It wasn't just a building campaign. It wasn't just like, let's get into a new facility. It was a place that we would come and lay our lives down. And so is that in your heart? Is that something that you want to do and be part of? And so I remember on that Sunday, we don't do this often, but we had these cards that we placed on everybody's seat, and on the card was an actual stone.
Oh, wow.
And on the question on that card was like, what role do I have to play in building the altar? Something to that effect. And I remember preaching, and like, sometimes as a preacher communicated the vulnerability is like, am I alone in it? Right. Here's this moment where we're saying, hey, this is what's up and how are people feeling? But at the end of the service, we were doing a little bit of ministry, and someone just grabbed their stone and came and placed it in the center of the stage. Well, we don't have a stage. It was on ground level, but they just placed it.
I thought you say they threw it.
Like, and then you just, threw it at me. Yeah. It was a beautiful moment. Talking to him afterwards, he was like feeling it in the spirit to do so. But as soon as he did it, another person.
Getting goosebumps.
And then you have this big pile of stones representing an altar in the middle of the stage. And I didn't manufacture that there. And so that just represented people coming to lay their lives down.
Man, that's so cool.
And so that was the like, oh, we're in this thing. Not long before any money was given. Right.
Because I remember going through a study of like the Israelites studying from like when they left Egypt, going into the promised land, and noticing that there's like these key points where God says, like, cross the Jordan River, get one person from each tribe to pull out like one of the big river stones, and they build this altar. Yeah. And then it seems like there's all these different key moments where God says, build an altar here or build an altar there after this big battle or whatever. And then I think I want to say Hezekiah, where there's an envoy from, I might get the enemy nation wrong, at least Syrians maybe. And they come in and they're like, oh yeah, we want to meet you or get to know you or whatever. And so Hezekiah takes them and shows them the grandeur of the temple and all the gold. And he shows them all the armory and all this cool stuff. And God's like, you should have shown them the altars. Like every moment, like, it's like, God did this big thing. and God did
Yeah.
this big thing. And
Mhm.
instead, he ends up giving like an inside look at how glorious, the country is, and how ripe of
Yeah.
how ripe of a fruit it is ready to be plucked. And I think there's
Yeah.
something really powerful there, even for us as pastors, where it's like, what are the things you're celebrating? And what are the mementos that you're placing?
Yeah.
And what are the altars that
Yeah.
you want to build? The things that are going to be
Yeah.
proof of God's intervention, things that you can look back on
That's
and say,
right.
"Hey, God did this for us." And as
Yeah.
I often like when I'm going off on a tangent, that's fun.
No, it's
Yeah,
great. It's
I like.
beautiful.
So I grew up in a really big family. So my mom and dad had 9 kids, and I haven't asked them why. I don't want to get into that conversation with my parents. But so, and my dad was a pastor, and so like there wasn't much money around, and I can remember our vehicle breaking down. I was like 10 years old or something. Too young to really be aware of everything. And then my dad coming home one day with this huge blue 12-seater van. And then I remember like, great, we have a new vehicle, you know? And so, getting in the van, and my mom and dad had put this plaque on the like they mounted it up like on the roof or whatever. And I can't remember the exact wording of it, but it was something like, like proof of God's provision for our family. Like somebody had like given them a huge pile of money for a brand new vehicle. And for like
Wow.
years, we'd all pile in that van. I'd see that. And it emblazoned something in me. And even though I was too young to to really experience, like, imagine the financial pressure my dad felt and then the relief of God coming through. Like I was too young for that, but because my parents made an altar, if you will, of that vehicle,
Yeah.
that turned into something that now has a big impact on me in my life. And it was like,
Yeah.
I can
That's
look
right.
back on that. It's like, man, it just, the altar
Yeah.
project is so cool. I love that,
So
dude. It's
good.
so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. We call it a monument of God's
Oh,
faithfulness,
100%.
right? That's the altar that he's building.
100%.
And like that was his intention in
Yeah.
Joshua, right? That the children would come back and ask, "What
Yeah.
is this?" And you would tell them about the faithfulness of God,
Absolutely.
the Red Sea, the Jordan River, all of
Absolutely.
it. So that's where we're starting to dial in. This isn't just a building
Mhm.
campaign. This is about God making his faithfulness
Yeah.
known to our
Yeah.
generation and the next.
So I think this does
Yeah.
bring up a really important point, which I think for most people listening, should be pretty obvious at this point, is that stepping into something like fundraising or a big ask, like, I feel like it's safe if you're following the clear leading of God. And so talk a little bit about that, and just in terms of an encouragement for pastors leading and leading and facing a difficult circumstance, maybe.
Yeah, I think as you're bringing up money becomes one of those like great exposures of our hearts, right? And it's why Jesus talk about it so often. But Matthew chapter 6, when we hear about seeking first the kingdom, his righteousness, and everything else to be added, like he talks about the difference between the pagans run after those things and your father knowing that you need these things, right? And so I think at the end of the day, it comes down to like sonship, understanding first, okay, well, my father's leading this charge and I'm standing here as a
Mhm.
son and I'm relating with the need as a son who has a father. Like he's the one that's gonna move this thing
Yeah.
forward. He's gonna do it through
Yeah.
me. He's gonna do it through my obedience. He's gonna do it through my surrender. But but the first place that it exposes is who I am before
Yeah.
him and whether or not I know myself as a
Mhm.
son, right? Because that catches me in the success and the
Yeah.
failure. And so through it all, I think money or not, if you're still struggling with who you are before him, that's the first place he's gonna go
Yeah.
after. Like I don't think he's gonna put things in our hands that allow us to avoid where we're not walking as sons
Yeah.
and daughters.
Dude, you're so right.
And so that was a big one for us. And then understanding from there that it's not about the
Mhm.
money. He can snap his fingers in a
Yeah.
second and make this happen.
Yeah.
It's about formation. And so all of the places as he sends us towards this big goal, so to speak, all the places that he wanted access to in our heart that he wouldn't have gotten unless he allowed us to step out
Yeah.
into this space.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean you see this all throughout Israel's
Yeah.
journey. This is spiritual
Yeah.
formations, all these things. And so having that in our minds as we're like, okay, we need $1.2 million. And we're just kind of this young church that, has no business raising that kind of money. We're like, okay, God, we yield to, if you're saying you're going to do this, where our eyes aren't going to be on the money.
Yeah.
Our eyes are going to be on your leadership. And you're going to talk to us about money.
Yeah.
You're going to talk to us about these things. But at the end of the day, like, we're going to be formed. And so that really informed how we went about seeking the money.
Yeah.
Where it would be easy to go get a benefactor, get a nice pitch deck. And I'm saying that because we tried. We did not start this thing with a high and noble, like, this is how we fundraise ideals. This is after the trials, right? The formation. So we tried, I mean, we sat down with very influential people in our city, the pitch deck over dinner. Here's what's happening. And I joke around with the church. I'm like, I don't know the numbers. I don't know the amount. I don't know the things that you're supposed to know. I know there's a lot. I know God's doing beautiful things. And I said, how can you put his presence in the pitch deck? And you know, I'm not against this thing, but that it wasn't what the Lord was doing with us because of the things I mentioned prior. Or we went and looked at those, you know, companies that help us get grants. Literally a $0 we just weren't good at selling what God was doing, if I could put it that way. In fact, we had some benefactors outside of this project, you know, wanting to donate to our church, but they were looking for certain things. And I'm like, I actually can't give you those things.
Like, what kind of things?
So, well, like, name the initiatives that you have on the downtown east side. And downtown east side is a very broken, impoverished place in our city that is filled with mental illness, and we have so much going on there, but it's not programmatic and it doesn't have this structure. And so I'm like, hey, listen, we got tons of people living there, discipling there, loving there, but we don't necessarily have formal programs that we can tell you that we're initiating there. So it was like, I want to be able to tell you these things, but I can't because it's not what the Lord is doing structurally amongst us right now. And so, there was a lot of that process with us of like, okay, Lord, we're trusting you to do this. There are avenues in our own wisdom that we can take to make this happen. But in our ignorance, in trying those things, and just, hey, God, will you do it? The doors were closing, and we had to understand that as a sign. We had to understand it as God's direction, and there was no grace on it. And we had to quickly learn that so we could send our energies in the right direction.
Absolutely, totally. And I was just we had with our small group last night. We were studying Psalm 91, and I just love that psalm. And it just talks about the protection, like we're constantly walking it as God's kids. And it's not like if I believe enough, then Psalm 91 applies to me. It's like, no, it applies to me because I'm his kid, and I can relax behind his wings because I'm his kid. And it might look scary, but he's there. And one of my favorite verses is, I can't remember the verse, but it's like right smack in the middle. It talks about his angels. Actually, Satan uses it in Jesus' temptation. Like, his angels will guard you, like they're like a hedge around you, right? And I think that is such a powerful image for me, because what it does is, like, that lets me know that the things in my life as I'm walking forward, if there's a door closing, it's not because I didn't have enough faith necessarily. It's not because there's enemy resistance, and not that those things aren't a thing, because they are, but it's I can trust if a door closes, it's because I'm not supposed to go that way. And I remember coming out of college and just feeling the sense of, like, sort of a meandering lostness, and a mentor is like, you just got to pick a direction and go, and trust that the Lord will open and close doors as you go. And it sounds like that's kind of the journey you guys went on, you know?
And the big one for that was anxiety, right? So when you move in a certain direction, it's not necessarily working out the way you thought it would. I think it exposes how much pressure is on you versus pressure on the Lord by how you respond to those moments, like you're saying, right? If I know I'm a son and a daughter, then it's just, oh, this is God's protection. But I think the human nature, and if we're carrying the pressure, like you mentioned, we might want to bulldoze through those situations, take them into our own hands. And so it was very important for me as a leader, and anybody who communicated about this, that we do not do it anxiously, and we don't impart that anxiety onto other people. Like, if you guys don't give, then I'm gonna look like a fool, right? We would never say that, but sometimes that comes out. Or like, if you guys would just give, it would alleviate my anxiety. never say that, but it would, sometimes it
Yeah.
comes out when we communicate. And so I would often say, this is not an anxious
Yeah.
moment, but this is a moment to appeal to the Lord and to say, hey, what part do I play in what you want to do,
Yeah.
God, as your son, as your
Yeah.
daughter? So that was big. That was a big one
Yeah.
for us. And like, again, learn that as we
Yeah.
learn.
Hmm. Man, I feel like if there's a thread through the conversation, everything from the conversation about branding and like your name versus the decision making versus the process. Um, what's really standing out to me is that the wisdom of the world says
Right.
do data, like look for data, look for research, like test run your brand name, your church name, and that's not the way that you guys went. That's not the way the Lord led you. The wisdom of the world says, looking to fundraise money, you get your pitch deck, you get this, get that, make sure you have all the numbers, make sure you can answer all the numbers and get what you need, get what you
Mhm.
want. And like, that's not what you guys did. Well, I should say
Yeah.
that's not how God led you. Like, and, um, and like, yeah, there's a way that seems right to us, but that's different than how God leads us a lot of the times.
Uh,
Um, so I don't know. Would you say it's a fairly accurate assessment or?
Say so. I mean, I'd sit back and hear that, and I'm like, oh, that sounds really, really nice. Like, good job, Brian and team. And I'm like, wow. But in reality, like in the humility of it, I mean, those are values that we
Yeah.
carry. Some of those things we move towards them, but again, we bumped up
Yeah.
against certain things. And I'll give you one quick example. We this January, we need 1.2 million, which crept up a ton. Like a lot was reserved for operations in our budget, but it all got eaten up by the project. And so we're like, we need the 1.2, and the construction's almost finished. Like it's going
Yeah.
like this, right? And I stood up in front of our congregation. I was preaching through Jesus on the boat, his disciples, and the storms come, but he said there's another side, and right, the call to a greater degree of faith, so as to not have to wake
Yeah.
him up. Where he's on the boat, he's now the expert on this situation, not
Mm.
me, because I'm a fisherman. When storms come, this happens. So Jesus, well, I'm the expert here. Wake up, do your
Yeah.
thing. Instead of saying, okay, well, there's something I'm missing. He's the expert on the
Yeah.
boat. And so like I stood up in front of the church and said, hey, listen, in light of this altars project and in front of the word of God, Jesus said, hey, there's another side. We've set our faith there. There's some things that seem like we're not going to get there. And there's a lot of things we can do to relieve our anxiety. And so I just stood up and I said, hey, we're not going to the bank. Maybe some great ideas coming from our team, from board, like, hey, let's just bridge. And like, it's still the church giving,
Yeah.
you paying the bank back. But no, Jesus said, like, all of this is coming. And so I stood up in front of the church and said, we're not going to the bank. And at that point, we needed about like $250,000 or $300,000. And I woke up the next morning with like the biggest vulnerability hangover. Like, what did I just say? Like, what is going on? But that Wednesday of that week, this is how faithful God has been. $130,000 was dropped into the
Wow.
bank out of
Yeah.
nowhere. And I'm like covered all of my fear, all of my anxiety. Like, oh Lord, you're actually doing
Yeah.
this. That didn't take us all the way to the goal, but we keep going down the road, and a couple months later, we get occupancy in the space, which is another miracle. We get occupancy in the space, and I get an email about that. 1 hour later, we're $120,000 short when we get occupancy. 1 hour later, I get a call from a fund manager saying, I have a client who wants to remain anonymous, but wants to donate the balance of your money. So we receive occupancy and full
Man.
donation like within an hour.
Oh,
And so it's really all the moments of anxiety, of worry, or lack of trust, or like wasted
mm.
moments. Like, why worry about tomorrow? Today has
Yeah.
enough worry of itself. Like, and so that's the big thing of like, oh, even though we had this like constitution or value to like be spirit led through the whole thing, that was tested over and over and over again. It's not as if doubt didn't creep in, but like that, no, we're gonna
Yeah.
believe, and like I think we're sinking here, but Jesus is
Yeah.
asleep, and if I could just say, and then we're
Yeah.
through.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he's faithful.
So do you have any like personal altars or personal ways that you like kind of create those mementos for yourself.
That's it. Yeah, that's great. Well, directly with this project personally, I don't know if this is going to speak to the heart of anybody listening, but I knew, and this kind of came through a prophetic word from a friend of mine too, but it resonated as very true in my own heart, where it was going to cost us personally, right? Financially speaking, right? Of course, all the formative ways, but like, as you mentioned, pastors, I'm like, okay, great, God, if you want us to cost us something, we have nothing to give, but like, if you want us to give something, you're going to have to give it to us first. And so there was a moment where we actually had some significant financial breakthrough toward the end of last year, personally, in our home. And then here we are, this feels nice. There's money, this feels great. And then just remembering like, oh yeah, this is going to cost us. And so I think there's that temptation of like, hey, we're the pastors you guys need to give. And so, it's this moment of clarity for us of like, we have to do, there's kind of a dam that needs to break through our own giving. And it wasn't as if we announced the church at all, but it was like, okay, there's a spiritual implication here about our leadership where this is going to cost us. We're not here to just be a mouthpiece. Like we're going to go first. And so that was a big one for us when it came to this project. Yeah. But personally, I think there's a high value of telling stories. And I think that's the biggest way. Like I have this little quirk right now as a dad, I want to go buy a camera where it's like, I actually want my kids to remember, like you said about the band. It's really a little quirk for me. Like I want to walk around with the camera, like my kids pose and all these things because I want them to remember these things. But I see that in God's heart, especially in the Old Testament where he says, remember well, he says, and do not forget. And I think that was the foundation of their blessing, where if they just remembered his faithfulness, it would have just covered them. And so now we have a building. I'm sitting in a room right now in this building, and we have to remember that this is not a right, it's not a privilege. It is in the midst of a downturn in the economy, in the midst of a really expensive city, in the midst of everybody pulling their hair out, trying to figure out what's going to come tomorrow. God gave us this space, and we cannot forget that. So everything should be an altar.
I hate that so much. I love it. But that's one thing I think that, like as a pastor, and I was before I was senior editor, lead pastor, I had my own business, and it's just crazy how often God has used finances just to teach me about his faithfulness. And I think just the tendency I have is to try to build a set of circumstances that mean I don't have to trust Jesus, And I just, and like, it's easy to say, I'm not doing that in my personal life. Like, or I'm doing these, whatever. But then I catch myself trying to do that in my church. And it's like, and that's, I think back to like that meeting with the 40 people. I'm like, when we can actually start to do things that sort of offload, I want to say like the spiritual responsibility from ourselves, where it's like, I say that, but I think what it actually means to me is offloading my ability to control a situation. And that's kind of what, if I wonder if like that's at the heart of money, is it's about control. Because you got money, it means you can do whatever you want. And
and that was the temptation to go to the bank. It's like, I'm not saying loans are bad or mortgages are bad. The point was that that's not what he had for us. It's not how he was leading us. And so we've been disobedient in some sense. But that was exactly the temptation to offload this worry. And one of the key places for us in scripture, right, is the man in the wilderness. Like they were utterly dependent on God.
Absolutely.
For food and for water. And then he takes them into the promised land. And they were no longer dependent on God for the same things. But what I think was happening there was he wanted them to choose dependency. Right. In their worship of him. So that's the big thing for us now, even in this project. It's like, okay, we're utterly dependent, but now we're in. It's tempting to get comfortable. And now we want to choose dependency. So we don't have this looming thing overhead anymore. And I think you're nailing it, where sometimes our prayers are to escape the need for dependency. Like, God, give me a rest so I don't have to depend on you anymore. If we're honest. And I think there's circumstances where we have to be dependent or we will
Yeah.
not live, right? Like you see this in third world countries where miracles are happening because you don't have any other
Yeah.
option. But for us now, like Israel in the promised land, where it was beautiful and you wanted them to work the land and live that way, they now have to choose to worship.
Yeah.
Choose to say, God, you're the one who got us
Yeah.
here, and never forget it. And I think that's the big thing now of like, yeah, we have this building, but who are we in this
Yeah.
building, and how do we see him
Yeah.
in it?
Yeah. It's like, it's taking the Church Untitled and say, okay, now what does it mean to really be untitled in this building?
Yeah.
Like now we have something that's
Yeah.
ours. Like, and not that you didn't have something before,
Yeah.
but yeah, man. Dude, I feel like
Yeah.
we could keep talking for a long time. I'm really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man. Likewise.
But I also,
Great.
the time's going by, and I just want to thank you for your vulnerability, for just like your candor, for sharing just the kind of the nuts and bolts of your experience. I think there's so much value here. Yeah. Would you mind, this wasn't in the show notes, but would you mind like just closing us out, maybe just like with a prayer specifically for
Yeah.
any pastors who are listening, who are looking at maybe doing something like this, and just needing direction and wisdom, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Father, we just acknowledge you in this moment, and thank you so much for your word that we can anchor ourselves to in the spirit that you've given us to share your heart with us, to be your heart in us. I just pray for every pastor, every leader, every board member, every deacon, everyone in position of leadership in the church is wondering what next looks like, is in a situation that you don't know how to move through or get out of. I just pray that like Jesus says in Matthew 6, that we would know you as a father who is first and foremost interested in our formation as sons and daughters to make us like Christ. And that you are most interested not in our personal success or getting it right or fundraising, but you're interested in our souls, knowing who we are before you, God, that you're loved, protected, covered. And God, we just acknowledge that you use every situation to do that. So I just pray for your voice, your heart, and nature to be made known to everyone listening in the midst of whatever they're walking through. And if they're wondering whether it's your voice in your leadership, would you clarify your voice in them? Would you give them places in the word to anchor to, send friends, send people to speak words of encouragement, to edify, to exhort? So I bless everyone listening. I bless them to know you, to walk with you, to say like Moses, "Run, Lord, as your presence goes." To just say your presence matters more than the promise. Yeah. Pray all this in Jesus' name.
Amen. Cool, dude. So good. Okay, so someone wants to like connect with you. Obviously churchuntitled.com. I think I got the website right. And then
that's right.
you're on Instagram, I think. Any other social platforms that?
Yeah, not doing a ton on
Yeah.
Instagram, but I'm there. Our church is on Instagram for sure. I'm there personally with Ryan Johnson. Hello@churchuntitled.com's email. Ryan@church.com's my email.
Cool, dude.
There's a way in this age. If you want to find me, you can find me.
100%.
Yeah. And if you're in Vancouver, Church Untitled, downtown Vancouver, 6668 Seymour Street.
Sweet.
Yeah.